So, hey, everybody, thanks for checking out our episode today with Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald, who's running for Attorney General. We heard a lot of things. You got to check it out, listen, tell your friends. She talked a lot about what she aspires to do if she's elected. I hope you'll listen. I hope you'll tell your friends about For the Sake of the Argument, because you can catch For the Sake of the Argument with Lori Goldman on every social media platform. Yes. Or you can come to my house and we'll watch together. So check us out next time. Have a great day. Karen McDonald, thank you so much for coming to For the Sake of the Argument today. Karen, I've known you ever since you ran for Oakland County Prosecutor, and you've been in office since 2020. Mm-hmm. So now you're running for Attorney General. And let me ask you this. What accomplishments are you proudest of, and what do you think there's still to be done?
You know, I have a really different path, and probably similar to you, even though you don't start out in college thinking most of my choices in my career will be dictated by my family. They end up being dictated by your family, and I mean, they do, and we don't like to admit that, but it is true. And so I started out as a teacher, and then went to law school, became an assistant prosecutor. But that time in law school, my third year, I was pregnant with my first kid, Maeve, who you know.
Yes.
And I had an offer to go to this really great firm and make a lot of money, and it was competitive, and everyone wanted that job. And I did the summer, and they gave me an offer to come back, and had to make this decision sort of at the last minute about what I was going to do. And I think that was the first moment really where it wasn't just about me. It was about how do I want to show up? And so instead of doing that at the last minute, I just applied for this research job with the Court of Appeals. It was like 7 months pregnant, and I got that job and told the firm I wasn't going to go there. And a lot of people thought that was crazy, but I trusted my gut, and it just didn't feel like the right move, even though it would have been a little bit easier on the money front. And then after a couple of years, went to the prosecutor's office as an assistant prosecutor, prosecuting child sexual assault cases. So that eventually led me to going to private practice. I ended up back at that firm later as a lateral, and then I ran for judge. But actually going to that, this is probably going to surprise you. The thing I'm most proud of, aside from the kind of mother that I am, which we always work on every day, right, is what I've done in the office that really the public can't see at all. All of the policy things that I ran on, I have delivered. There's still a lot of work to do, but the thing that I'm most proud of is creating a culture in my office that I never had as a young woman or a working mom. One that respects the people that work in the office, understands the sacrifice of public service, and is absolutely willing and motivated to offer grace and flexibility to people when they need it, because I believe that they'll pay that back 100 times over. And trying to look at things differently and do things differently, from not leading the office with fear or authoritative bullying, but really providing a culture where people are not afraid to say what they think, even when they disagree with me. And I think that's really been a game changer for me in terms of what kind of leader I am. If you can't lead in a way where people want to follow you and are engaged, then it doesn't really matter what you believe. It doesn't really, especially an attorney general,
right,
or a prosecutor, right? Anything you do, if you have a team of people and you have all of these things you want to get done, if you can't get the people who are doing the work with you engaged in the same way or working on your team, then you're not going to get any of those things done. And I think that's kind of the stuff that public and lots of times voters they don't really look at that, right? But if you are linked into just sort of behind the scenes, the way offices are run or the way public officials handle the people that work around them, you can tell who's going to be successful and who is going to have a problem right at the beginning, because if they don't surround themselves with people that will say, you know what, I just don't agree.
So I'm sure the prosecutors that work under you are appreciative of creating a work environment like that. But whether it's you or someone that comes after you, what do you think still needs to be done in the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office?
The amount of crime and the kinds of crime that we are seeing, it's almost like drinking out of a fire hose. It really is. We have, I believe, come so far since I ran for prosecutor at the beginning, just the whole change in the way we approach cases, using your discretion, what's the overall goal. Public safety has to be first, but making those tougher decisions about what do we want in this case and what's going to protect the public, and also what's going to keep this person out of the criminal justice system later on, or if appropriate. Those are really tough things, and we have definitely planted roots. But we still have a long way to go with just training and wiring assistant prosecutors to hold up to the scrutiny. You know, from 2020 to 2024 in my reelect, it's like nobody cared about fair and just prosecution anymore, right? All of those things that we are still doing and work so hard. You know, we did a conviction integrity unit, a racial justice advisory council. You know, so many things we've invested in problem solving courts. I created a whole top administration job just to deal with alternatives to the criminal justice system and places where we could offer services where people need it, maybe keep them out, or first offender programs, looking at ways we can really get involved in our juvenile justice division and help kids. But for what people believe right now, that violent crime is higher than it ever has been, and that there's a public safety threat. And so I'm still doing that work, and we're still going to continue to do it. I think it's harder than ever because there's such a feeding frenzy about, leveling attacks and scrutiny every time you don't, take the hardest possible a path or road. And it's harder to do the job the way it should be done now than ever before. And Oakland County is absolutely, my office is the most scrutinized in the entire state.
Wow.
The media cycle is just hyper-focused on everything that we're doing. I have a sheriff who's very public and out there, so there's a lot of transparency. I always joke with Kim Worthy, so much stuff goes on in Wayne County and they don't report about it.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of reasons behind that, but that's hard. And it's hard enough for me to have that courage every day. Imagine how it is for assistant prosecutors who are afraid. And what do people who are afraid do? The safest thing. And what is the safest thing in criminal justice? It's to charge the highest charge, ask for the highest sentence. And, it's kind of a CYA thing. That's what typically prosecutors are accused of doing and have done. I definitely think there's accountability there. But it's because, I have people in my office right now who've been practicing law for 6 months to 35 years.
Wow.
And it's up to me to provide an environment where they're trained properly, they have the support that they need, but I'm going to have their back, right? I don't throw anybody under the bus, even though sometimes it's hard because I take responsibility for a lot of stuff I sometimes don't even know about. But I think that is the thing that still has to be. It's imperative that we have somebody in that role that doesn't take their eye off that and being courageous, because there's a reason why people have failed at that, and it's because it's really hard.
So let me ask you, you're running to be Michigan's next attorney general.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me in a few sentences why you want that job.
I'm really proud of what I've done in Oakland County. I think what I could do heading an office like the AG's office, where there's a much bigger footprint that you can have on things like gun violence, which is the number one cause of death for kids in this country. The way that we approach enforcement on all levels, holding people accountable, whatever actor that is, right, that's threatening the people of the state, but also providing an approach that gets us where we want to be in the most practical way. And right now, we're being asked as the AG, the whole different issue here is just the most important office, I think, on the ballot. And
I agree.
because we can elect a governor we want and a senator we want, but it won't help us when it comes to protecting us from sending the National Guard here or taking away things that properly appointed funds that we need to get, the bullying tactics. If you don't have the lawyer for the state that's willing to fight that, it won't matter. The governor can't force the AG to file a lawsuit. It's very important that your listeners understand that.
It's a lot of autonomy then in the AG's office.
And the governor, that's true. And the AG can be a huge obstacle to a governor, right? It's the people's lawyer. And that's why it is imperative that role be preserved and we keep that role and we keep that job. So, but at the same time, because of that, which is somewhat of a newly injected like priority and urgency, but there's also just a real importance, I think, on juggling what are we going to use our resources for? Because we don't have an abundance of resources.
Right.
And so prioritizing that from the lens of what's best for the people of the state, right? And largely the majority of the things the AG does is regulatory and civil in nature, which is my background. I was in the private sector for some time. Mm-hmm. And again, knowing that without those policies and engagement up and down the ranks, it doesn't really matter what the AG says or wants if the people who are actually doing the work, the rank and file, don't care, right? And they're making important decisions on regulating utility costs and our environment and whether or not a hospital system can merge and the effects on certain communities that, pollution has. Those are really important things that don't, even small things that have huge impacts on communities, like venture capitalists buying up, a bunch of houses and having them sit in neighborhoods and not taking care of them. That impacts that neighborhood. I had a man come up to me and say at a congressional district meeting, he said, he was in a wheelchair, and he said, I have something that I think really matters. And I said, what? And he said, none of the places around us will take our bottle returns. Mm. He lives in the city. He said, they sell them to us, but they won't take them back.
Wow.
And he said, I have a whole garage full of bottles. If I want to return them, I've got to get a car and drive 10, 15, 20 minutes to a Kroger that will take my bottles, which isn't really feasible for him and many people in his community. So that seems like a small thing, but it's not a small thing, especially right now when the grocery prices and everything else. That's money in their pocket. And that's squarely within the AG's wheelhouse, right? You don't necessarily have a county prosecutor that's going to care about that, or maybe, a city administration. But that kind of thing is, if you're regulated, do so, and that's a requirement, you need to do it.
Yeah, it's a big job.
It is. It's a big job.
So what makes you think or feel that you're the best option out of this primary field to be the people's attorney?
Ellie is a good friend. I know Mark, respect both of them a lot. Anybody who's willing to put their hat in the ring on this level, I respect. And they have very impressive pedigrees. But there isn't another candidate other than me who, grew up the way I grew up, not in Oakland County, but in a very small farming community. My dad was a construction worker. My mom stayed at home, and we didn't really have that much money. I look now and I think, well, I guess we didn't have money from the standpoint of money was always, always a problem. They were always worried about money. And, I still think that I had so much, right, compared to most people. But the stress that has on a family, what I know that I think is really difficult to understand it unless you've lived it, is that political ideology and democracy and the Constitution, those are things that, I'm a lawyer, former judge. This is what guides me. But what I know is that when you're struggling and your family is stressed and you've got somebody laid off, the primary income earner, and you're not sure how you can buy groceries, you don't want to hear about that. And when I look back about, where my parents were politically, it always veered and blew towards how were they doing?
Right.
How are they doing? And I think we, particularly in our county and people around us sometimes, and even in this region and politics, I think we miss that conversation. And we like to tell people what they should care about, right? Not saying that you can't do that well and represent the whole state without that experience, but I think
it gives you another dimension.
Well, you know what it does, Lori? It's I have worked so hard for every single thing I've had and had to overcome obstacles that for sure my opponents in the primary did not, right? I am a product of public school education. I only went to undergrad and law school with aid and loans. I don't come from an Ivy League background. I didn't have a safety net. And I think that that's what makes me successful. That's what makes me good at campaigning. That's what makes me a good leader, because I don't have to spend all of the heavy lifting of, I wonder what that's like. I wonder what that's like to be in a situation where, we have witnesses come in and we take a lunch break, and a lot of people assume that they can just go down and get lunch.
Right. And they can't.
And they cannot. Right. I've been the kid at the table so many times in college where I couldn't go to dinner because I didn't have the money to pay for it. Right. But I also think it's what gives me courage to do things I know may put me in political peril.
Okay.
And I think that's because I'm not afraid of losing. I'm not afraid of being out of a job. And that, I think, once you have the experience of having to make those kinds of decisions and knowing where you land and taking so much scrutiny for it, right? You earn your stripes.
Right.
I also, just from a practical matter, I come from the second largest county. I have the most experience campaigning and fundraising, and I don't do it like most people do it. I spend a lot more time engaging with people and talking to people. I started out my career as a judge in politics, and that's a nonpartisan race. So I didn't just talk to Democrats. There are a lot of people that felt the same way I did. And more I realized what a great experience that was for me, because, I purposely make myself consume right-wing media.
Sure.
Because there are so many of us, Democrats, that only listen to things that, media outlets that agree with us, only talk to people that agree with us. And we're not challenging our own thinking.
And we don't all agree.
Oh, gosh. No, that's another
yeah.
pet peeve. We don't agree. That we use these terms like, the Republicans, the Democrats. No. I don't say Republicans. Mm-hmm. I don't, because I am not here to defend and rebut every decision that every person in my party has ever said or done. So I think from a practical standpoint, and I think our disclosures have shown that I have the ability to win. And that's not because I go around and talk to a bunch of rich people. It's because I believe that I'm a very relatable person. And let me just we got to be smart about this. Whoever we nominate has to be able to get swing voters and independent voters to vote for them. Our state voted for Trump. I don't like to remember that every day, but I force myself to. They voted.
It's hard to forget it.
It's hard to forget. But again, when you spend a lot of time with people that are like-minded, you think, well, that's preposterous. But I don't believe that those are. There's a whole group of people that just are like my mom and dad.
Sure.
They want somebody that doesn't seem foolish to them, doesn't make them feel judged, and is going to do something that on issues that really matter to them, which are these kitchen table issues.
Right.
And we have to win. We have to win a seat.
Well, let's talk about those Republicans. Republicans who've been caught breaking the law. I hear there are a few, as well as Democrats, to be fair. But from the Flint water crisis to the fake elector scheme to the DiPerno tabulator case, routinely claim they're victims of lawfare. I've just become familiar with that term, while at the same time cheering on Trump's DOJ, Department of Justice, for going after people like James Comey, who were simply doing their jobs. How do you, if you're elected, cut through that hypocrisy and make sure voters, people in Michigan, understand the difference between political persecution and real accountability for actual crimes?
The rule of law and what that means, and how threatened that is it's what motivates me the most. It's ingrained in me. The law is the law. It isn't up for debate, and we can't use it and change it. And sometimes, stick to it. Sometimes we don't. That can't be, especially the highest law enforcement official in the state. But part of the Attorney General's job is to root out and hold people accountable that are engaged in corruption. And that's almost always people who are holding a public office, right? So that is the job that must be done in cases where that individual is from the opposite party. I think always from my standpoint, extra scrutiny should be involved. For instance, we get those cases where are presented to us that there's some alleged voter fraud. And there's a whole group of cases, even though we prosecute hundreds and like thousands of that just I have to approve. And when they bring them to me, I don't look at anything before. And I have told them, I don't want to know who the person voted for. Tell me the facts of the case. Do not tell me who the person voted for. Because, look, do I think that that's going to bias me? No. We all like to think that we're not biased. But I'm doing that to protect the process, and the people around me need to know that I am making sure I'm not making a decision based on somebody's political party.
All right, that's fair.
Yes. And on a larger scale, though, I've actually issued a statement and called for every single candidate in the AG's race on both sides to pledge to protect the rule of law. I did not have takers, but the point is I want to have that conversation in our race right now. The courageous thing is going to be presented with the investigation of somebody and your, opponent or the opposite party. You got to do the right thing. You have to do the right thing. I use the example of Oxford all the time. There were a lot of people on the left didn't like the way I charged the shooter. A lot of people on the right weren't happy about the parents' prosecution. I was actually certain when I announced it that I was going to be a one-term prosecutor because there was going to be a huge backlash. But I did it anyway. And I was really intentional and vocal about I'm going to stand and I'm going to do what I think is right. But you also have to always then provide transparency, and you owe the people of the state or whoever elected you the accountability to say, why are you doing this, and being transparent about what. There isn't a path forward in this job or any other job, but specifically this job, where you're not going to encounter a lot of accusations.
Right. It comes with the territory.
It does.
Let me ask you this. What can you do to protect Michigan from this kind of state overreach that Trump and his DOJ are visiting upon attorneys generals in various states? And then a second question to that is, you mentioned about asking for a pledge. Isn't the nature of your job and the oath that you take to uphold the rule of law?
Yes.
So you're going to be committing to that. as will others, whomever prevails, that will happen. But what can you do to stop Trump from fucking with us in Michigan?
I got to give props to Dana Nessel, because this is not, she has absolutely done that and stepped up every single time. I was just recently on a panel discussion with the AG of Arizona, Chris Mays, and these are one of the Democrat attorneys general across the state, across the country, that are joining in these lawsuits. I'm also been in touch and gone to a conference with DAGA, which is the Democratic Association of Attorneys General, and they are very unified and well prepared and well resourced. That has to be an ongoing priority of whoever sits in that seat. Chris Mays brought up something that was just terrifying. Right now she's the only person that can file a lawsuit against Mike Johnson for not swearing in the representative who was just elected, right? And she said it's so important to do this, but it's also important because we want to take back the House. But if he doesn't swear anybody in, it won't matter. And the only person that can, of each state, that has standing to file lawsuits are the attorneys general. That's it. So on this point, I don't think there's any daylight between me and my opponents. All three of us are absolutely unified in that. And Dana has done absolutely the right thing and come with force and courage, and everyone knows what she's going to do. And that is exactly the kind of AG we need to reelect.
Yeah, she's been very fearless, I think. She's taken a lot of heat for it, but she's done the right thing.
Right.
One of your priorities in this campaign seems to be cracking down on public corruption. Give us an explanation of the problem and what you think this would look like from the AG's office, how to, keep that to a minority instead of what it seems to be doing these days.
When I came into the prosecutor's office, there was this big bias and worry from law enforcement that I was there to just prosecute police officers, right? And the way that you protect the purity and unobjectivity of that process is by building very transparent protocols about how you are going to do this. And when it came to officer-involved shootings, there really wasn't one. There was like one person looked at it and then recommended what the prosecutor should do, which is not how you do it, right? No. So being transparent about published protocols, and now there is one, and there's a group of people, and each, segment is represented, and we do it a certain way, and we do it every single time. That is best practice, I believe. So when you're investigating or a case of public corruption comes before you, you have to treat every single one the exact same way and follow exactly the same protocol as you do every single time. Now, from an AG's perspective, that it doesn't look like, ordering investigations on day one of everybody in the opposite party. But I mean, that is what's happened, right? But you have to be, and I've done that in my office, and I'll do that as the next attorney general. Here's the stated protocol. It's published. This is what we're doing, right? Yeah. If this and being transparent about how this came to be. I didn't just read it on Twitter. I didn't just listen to a podcast, come in one day and say, Michigan State Police, go see what Eric Nesbitt's doing. I don't like A, B, and C. That's not the way it should go. And that is the problem, right? I think that AGs do conduct investigations, but there has to be protocols in which you're very transparent about how you got to that place. Because what we can't do is allow that claim and that fear of that claim to sort of intimidate us from holding people accountable, right? And you have to block out the noise. But the way you do that is by publishing and creating very solid protocols on how you're going to investigate and charge. And it has to be done the same way every time.
It all comes back to transparency. Mm-hmm. We all want it. And the more we get, the more it's going to restore our faith.
Right.
So related to the issue of public corruption is corporate PAC donations. It's been a hot topic lately. Other candidates in various races have sworn off corporate PAC money. Both of your competitors for the AG race have. Can you let us know why you haven't done the same?
Well, I don't. I've been asked throughout my career to make black and white statements about what I will do and what I won't do, and I've never done that, and here's why. I haven't taken corporate PAC money at this moment, but I already have folks on the right, like DeVos, tweeting at me and their groups, right? I am absolutely sensitive about campaign contributions and people making them with expectations. I deal with that every single day. Defense attorneys give me a large amount of contributions, and you know what they get for it? Zero. They know, you know what they get? They get the knowledge and the trust that they've elected somebody with principles and integrity. I take calls, but I'll take calls. I take calls from you, right? I've
paid all my traffic tickets. Never got off on one.
Okay, well that's great. But the point is, if there's a worry that somehow if somebody or some corporation gives me money and it'll influence a decision, we have bigger problems. But candidly, my biggest worry here is it's great that there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party that are calling for this, and I understand why. And I agree, we need to take money out of politics. But the Democratic Party handicapping each of their candidates at this point.
I agree.
And then we get to the general election and they've got, DeVos millions of dollars, and I'm standing here because I made some pledge. I'm not doing that. And I'm not saying I've got checks waiting. I don't. What I am saying is until it's an equal playing field and it's reciprocal, why would we do that? And by the way, one of our most esteemed Dem AGs is Frank Kelly. Frank Kelly, this whole thing about not taking corporate money. I mean, Frank Kelly enjoyed a very close relationship with many of the corporations that he absolutely regulated, still a champion of consumer protection. I am not somebody that is going to swear off a whole group of people as evil. I'm not doing it. It's not how I run my office now. It's not how I will run my office when I'm the next attorney general. And we have to get out of our own way, right? We have to get out of our own way. I've been the top fundraiser so far, and that's not because corporate PAC gave money to me. But I don't want any candidate in a general election where so much is at stake to be completely behind the ball because of a pledge that it's not an equal playing field. The Republicans are getting saturated with all of this corporate money. And I think that's just common sense.
If you're elected as Michigan's Attorney General, how will you protect workers from exploitation, such as what we just learned is the biggest exploitation of workers, wage theft and unsafe working conditions, which growing up in a steel town and having a grandfather that was maimed by working in a steel mill is really still important to me.
Yeah. One of the things spent a lot of time talking to labor groups. We have now in Michigan a lot of very pro-labor legislation and laws that will help. But if you don't have the capacity or resources and on enforcement, it's not going to matter, right? So when you talk about there's a lot of trafficking cases actually going on that are labor trafficking where they're bringing in young people, children from Mexico to work on these job sites. And they are not, absolutely violative of all of the laws. If you don't have the enforcement mechanism, and a lot of times like the carpenters, they'll put together a whole investigation for you. But we have to have an AG's office that's actually going to bring those cases and charge them. So the legislature has done a good job. There's more to be done, but the AG has to have dedicated people who are actually going to bring those cases. And again, that goes back to how are you going to spend the resources that you have, because we have dwindling resources. So I think this comes down to knowing what your rank and file are doing and making that a priority to try it. Because what I've learned, we've really done a lot of work on trafficking, and not just sex trafficking, but labor trafficking in Oakland County. These massage parlors, we charged the first massage parlor owners ever in this county. This stuff is going on right underneath our noses. And the reason it is because if you don't enforce it, if you don't have law enforcement charging those cases, there's no reason for people to stop doing that. And right now, the wage theft and the kind of things that are going on with like bringing in, the misclassification and all of that, if you don't have people and resources directed towards trying to enforce that, that will continue to go on.
I'm going off script, but this is going on under our noses. So what can the average citizen like myself, if you go in to get a massage someplace, or you go into a restaurant of some kind and you see little kids working or things that don't seem right, is it being weird to call the Attorney General's office and say, hey, I think I saw something, I don't know what's there, but I wanted to relay it to you?
In Oakland County, we have now a human trafficking task force. And so we have a multi-agency team, and the prosecutor works with them. So you could call us. But that is exactly what it takes, because I brought in somebody to do a training of law enforcement, because the real problem here was we don't have law enforcement. We used to look at this as consensual sex work. Okay. There's like almost no such thing as consensual sex work. And I understand that there's a very progressive movement. I don't know that that's such a priority now, but 4 or 5 years ago, about not prosecuting or, legalizing consensual sex work. But what we have found, because I've done my homework, is that this is not consensual sex work. Even when you look at a young woman and say, I'm consenting to this, I'm consenting to this. Those are 99% of the time, those are trafficking situations. Those are there's a trafficker behind that, making a lot of money, providing food, clothing, shelter, a drug they're addicted to, oftentimes abusing them.
Circumstances.
Yes. They're the hardest cases to prosecute, because they continue to say, no, it's consensual, it's consensual, it's consensual. And so we have to train law enforcement on how do we look at that without treating this woman like she's a prostitute and, basically a criminal. And it was a game changer. And after the training, we've had a flood of trafficking cases. I mean, this is a very lucrative business, and it is going on right underneath our noses. Any kind of hotel, we know the hotels, right? Any community that has a hotel with like little under $100 or lower rate, and a lot of them along 75, that is where that's happening. With the massage parlors, there is a website that anybody can go on, and it will tell you where you can get these massages and sexual acts, how much they are, they rate them, they say what you can get for this, the hours. It's open to anybody. Think about that, Lori.
Well, I am. How do I get kicked off Facebook for saying fuck?
Exactly.
And you can have this out for public consumption.
Right.
This is bullshit.
It's total bullshit. Sorry, it is.
God.
It's called rub mats. I mean, it's
what's it called?
Rub mats. You can go on and find out.
It's horrible.
And look, we just charged a case where these women were brought in from China, not legally here. They were trafficked here, brought in through New York. They were placed in 2 of these massage parlors, and they were actually living there. They didn't have a place to live.
Gee, do you think maybe our National Guard and ICE should be checking this shit out?
Exactly.
You think maybe that would be a good use of their time? Okay, all right. Let me ask you this question. Vulnerable populations like LGBTQ and immigrants have come under relentless attack from the Trump administration. How would you protect these groups as Michigan AG?
The same way that we're doing that now. We partnered early on with Fair Michigan. They came in and talked to us about, victims of any kind and witnesses that we have from those communities have unique barriers and obstacles, and we can't meet their needs unless we're educated and we know about them. And so that partnership has really been important, not just training our people in our office, but also being able to call and say, listen, we have a trans person here, the victim of a crime, a sexual assault, whatever it is, we need support. How can we help? With cases involving illegal residents here, the way this normally comes up is we have somebody who's charged with a crime that is teed up to, if we pursue that charge, will have a very disproportionate consequence of deportation. What once was unlikely is now very likely.
Right.
Most of the time, we can make decisions about how the charge is going to be made or what we're going to. Sometimes we can't because it's too egregious. Our law enforcement in general in Oakland County, and I know the sheriff too, like we don't reach out to ICE to say we have somebody. I mean, look, the cases where somebody's going to be deported and we have, a kid rape case or a murder.
Right, they're in your system.
Yeah, they're in the system. They will immediately be dealt with, and it's out of our hands. And frankly, that's not the cases. Those aren't the cases we're talking about. But remember, what we also do is we do child support enforcement, and that we see a lot of people who are really, really in bad shape, right? And we have to make decisions about whether to prosecute or enforce a child support. And if somebody doesn't have legal status, I mean, it's tragic. We have these women come in and they have no way of supporting their kids. And we do what we can and work with private sector and sometimes even out of our own pocket to help. But we're going to, and by the way, I know this isn't a question, but top of mind this morning for me is how the people that we service every day, victims of crime and witnesses, are going to be impacted by the cutoff of SNAP. I mean, we're talking about
devastation.
People, we're going to be dealing with with witnesses and victims who can't eat,
right.
And we're going to have to find a way to remedy that. And if we do our own food pantry in our office, that's what we'll do. But I'm not going to have, kids go hungry. And so if we're going to have to do something. I mean, imagine we have these kids who are victims of crime and, they are now in a situation where we can't even be sure they're getting their basic needs met.
No, hunger will override everything. Mm-hmm. All right, this is kind of a yes or no question. Should Michigan become a sanctuary state to protect immigrants from federal overreach?
I think Michigan is a state that protects immigrants. And I know that any elected official I know, particularly in our party, is. I think that the leaders in Congress absolutely, we cannot use people who are here, by the way, because their needs are not being met in their own country. They can't feed their families as political pawns. This bussing around, immigrants and to different states and cities. I mean, these are people. These are human beings, right?
Yes.
And look, as a former judge, as a prosecutor, as a mom, as a human being, I don't first think about when I meet somebody, are legal? I think, how can I help you? And that we have to lead with that. How can I help you? Offering grace and compassion for people who are not here to commit crimes. If anybody can speak with authority about this, I can. And I'm telling you, the bulk of the people we charge are not illegal immigrants. They are not.
Not surprised.
They are
not surprised. All right, now we get to do the fun part, the lightning round. In your opinion, what is the most nonsensical law on the books in Michigan?
Oh, whoa. I don't know how I got to think about that.
I heard recently, I was on Facebook or Reels or whatever, and in Tennessee or one of those states, they are having a little fight about eliminating, making it illegal to marry your first cousin. And there's a debate about it. So that's kind of crazy. So I don't know if Michigan, didn't we have something like that recently where, you had to be a certain age to be married, and some of the Republicans said, wait, it's okay. Some 16-year-olds need to marry their first cousin who's 50.
from a practical standpoint, I think we lack consistency with regard to age, right? In one hand, it's you have to be this age and you can consent to a sexual act, but you can't vote. Yeah. You can buy, you know what I mean? You can be this age and
you can go to war, but you can't drink.
Right, you can't buy cigarettes.
Yeah.
That to me is the most nonsensical. We're starting to change the way we treat juveniles and, you know, the brain development portion of charging, but we have across the board a complete inconsistently applied age qualifications that makes absolutely no sense. We can send you away, but you can't drink.
Do you have any politicians or political figures that you look up to?
I am a avid reader, and I give up sleep. It doesn't matter. I read every single day, and it doesn't matter how late I have to stay up. I read every single day. And one of the things I'm doing I always have like 2 or 3 books going, depending on what I'm in the mood for. But I'm reading Madeleine Albright's autobiographies, and I lots I didn't know about her, but really admire and respect the way that she came up and her approach. And any woman that is in positions of power, I just read Kamala's book as well. Good, great. I highly recommend it. There's just this underbelly of what it's like to be in a position of influence and power as a female. And one of the reasons it's an underbelly thing is because we don't talk about it, because talking about it, we've been programmed not to talk about how hard it is to be.
Just get there.
Yeah. Don't draw attention to it.
Right.
But it is absolutely a unique challenge, and it has obstacles that most people have no idea about. It's very difficult.
What's one issue or policy that you think Dems need to embrace but haven't yet?
So I'm a trial lawyer by training. And one of the things that good trial lawyers do is they prep their witnesses. And when you prepare a witness to testify, you say, your job is to tell the truth. You let me worry about making the argument. But don't refuse to concede the obvious or the truth just because you don't want to agree with the defense attorney. And I think our party and politicians in general right now have to concede the truth and look at things in a more honest way. And I think we don't do that anymore. You know, I have, you and I could talk forever about our disdain just morally for the president. But the hostages are free. And there's food going in to Gaza. And so I think both things can be true. And I will never, another thing, we had a border problem. The reaction and the solution is barbaric and is not working, is not reasonable. And I think most Americans think are just a complete disastrous wearing of our constitutional rights. But both things can be true. There are common sense solutions to that problem, just like there are common sense solutions to crime prevention, and it's not putting the National Guard on the streets. So on the other hand, when we talk about Republicans, I'm constantly hearing about how bad crime is, but you don't want to talk about guns at all.
Right.
We're not going to talk about the fact that, we have kids that go to school and parents that drop them off and are worried that their kids might be shot, right? We're not going to talk about that it's the number one cause of death. We're going to pretend the gun thing isn't an issue. That's dishonest. It's failing to concede the obvious and the truth. And I will never do that just to make a point, because I don't think it's credible and I don't think it's honest.
Karen McDonald, Oakland County Prosecutor, thank you for being with us today and candidate for Attorney General.
Thank you.